This is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words.
Hello, Rebels. This is the Mini Rebel, introducing you to episode 23 of the Rebel Author Podcast.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's intro by Mini-Me. That's what happens when you're locked in a house and there's nowhere to record in the quiet. So today's podcast is with Jules Horne, and we are talking all about how to write better for audio, be it for audiobooks or scripts or radio. This episode will not only show you how to write better audio. This episode not only will show you how to write better for audio, but also improve your writing as a whole. But first to last week's question. I asked, where do you get your books? Lots of answers once again this week, and the majority of you did say Amazon because you all have Kindles, but there were mentions of lots of other stores, including Barnes & Noble, library books, independent bookstores, and the podcast's once a month sponsor, Kobo. This week's question is, what is the best book you've read this year? I am not sure what the best book I've read this year is. I am wildly behind where I normally am at this point in the year, and I'm not really sure why that is. I think I've probably been working later in the evenings and therefore read less, but also, life things getting in the way. But the current book that I'm reading at the moment, I think is going to end up being one of the best books I've read this year. And that is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Kathleen Doherty. And that's all about her time working in a crematorium, and it's, I guess, an exploration of death, which, if you've listened to this for any amount of time, probably won't be a surprise, as you know I have an obsession with death. Okay, so the book recommendation this week is, of course, our lovely guest, Jules Horne's Writing for Audiobooks, Audio First for Flow and Impact. I listened to the audiobook of this book last year, and that is exactly why I asked her on the show. I highly recommend this book, not just if you have an interest in turning your books into audiobooks, but also because I think this will help to improve your prose and your writing anyway, and I will include links to that in the show notes. In personal update today, I got back the Anatomy of Prose edits from my editor, and I completed all those changes, and I also finished formatting, which, whoa, was absolutely brutal. So my last two non-fiction books, 13 Steps to Evil, How to Craft a Superbad Villain, and 10 Steps to Hero, How to Craft a Kick-Ass Protagonist, were around the 40 to 45,000 word mark. This book is topping out at just shy of 68,000 words, so it is significantly longer, almost. What's that? Oh God, me trying to do numbers. Probably almost 40% longer. So it is a bit of a beast. And I use vellum to format, and which means I have to do it myself. But it also means that because I write non-fiction and there's lots of quotes and there's examples and there's subtitles, there's loads of fiddly bits and bobs that need formatting. Now, this book, whilst there are 12 steps or 12, overarching chapters, within those chapters, because it's such a beast of a book, I have almost sectioned them down so they're like mini chapters. And wait for it, there are 123 of these like mini chapters. So it's a big book. I think it's approaching 400 pages. I think it's around 370, something like that, 375. But I won't know for definite until I get the proofs, which I will be ordering this week. So this evening I am going to be finishing off like the acknowledgements, and then I will be pulling the templates off so that I can send them to the designer to send me back the paperback templates, which means I can then order my proofs. So I'm so excited. The ebook is up for pre-order on Amazon, but now that I have the book, I will be loading it up to the other stores, the Barnes & Nobles, the Kobos, the Apple iBooks, whatever it's called now. So yes, I will be getting the pre-order up there, and then hopefully by the last bit of the week, I will also have the paperback pre-order up too. So this coming week, other than doing those things, I will really be looking at launch tasks now. I'll be also finishing up the workbook, the download. There's like there's 2 additional downloads, one which is free to everybody and one which you can get by signing up to my mailing list. I also, this is exciting, I set up my audio booth. I have like a mini audio booth which I set up within my very tiny office, and so I will hopefully be starting to record the audiobook as well. If you would like to help with the launch of the Anatomy of Prose, if you'd like to be an advanced reader, then there is still time to get on the street team. I have a short form which can be found at bit.ly/AOP team. So bit.ly/AOP team. And I will also put that in the show notes if you would like to join the street team, and there will be lots of giveaways and prizes, especially for street teamers. Last bit of news, I was on the Alliance of Independent Authors Inspirational Indie Authors podcast today, actually, which is Sunday. So if you would like to listen to that, and also the interesting thing is it's not like a traditional, me talking about villains or heroes or anything like that. It's much more Howard has a very personable interview style where he goes and digs into like your past, and so you will get to find out a bit more about me. Okay, Listener Rebel of the Week this week is Kathleen March. Kathleen says, when I taught at university, I was the object of fierce criticism by a colleague. She thought she was a feminist too. When I heard she was commenting about my family and what she said was a total lie, I waited until right after a faculty meeting when people were still standing in the room. I then calmly but very firmly said, "Keep your mouth off my family." Everyone heard me, and the good-sized woman shrank. I love that, because there is nothing better than standing up for your loved ones, and also it takes a lot of balls to stand up to people. I don't know why, but often we're expected to be meek and mild, and I just don't think that's right. I think we ought to be standing up for ourselves, and this is a wonderful example of not only standing up for yourself but also defending your family. So good for you and your rebellion. If you would like to be a Rebel of the Week, please do send in your stories. It can be any kind of rebellion. You can big, small, or somewhere in between. If you'd like to be a rebel, then you can email your story to rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com or tweet me at rebelauthorpod. One new patron today, thank you, and a huge welcome to Julia Fortune, who also has a pretty awesome name, by the way. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to all of my patrons who help to ensure that this podcast continues. If you would like to support the show and get access to all of the bonus essays, posts and content, you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting www.patreon.com/Sasha Black, and as always, that's Sasha with a C and not an S. Let's get on with the interview. Hello and welcome back to the Rebel Author Podcast. Today I am joined by Jules Horne. Jules is an award-winning fiction writer, playwright who performs spoken word as Rebel Cello, love that. She is a passionate indie author and teaches on the Open University Creative Writing MA. Welcome, Jules.
Hello, Sasha. Really lovely to be on your show.
And before we start, I am just going to make an apology. It appears my very inconsiderate neighbours have decided to start building something today. So I'm just peering out of the window, which is why the sound's going funny. There's some sort of drilling, cutting metal kind of device. So yeah, if you hear that, I apologise.
It's a bit inconsiderate, isn't it? I mean,
God, so rude.
Of them.
God, some people work at home, guys. Anyway, right. Let me focus. Okay, tell everyone a little bit more about you, your writing journey, and how you got to where you are now.
Thanks, Sasha. Yes, I just wanted to, it's quite a long journey because I'm a bit elderly, so I just wanted to sort of really in a nutshell. But I think what's always important with writer journeys is you find somebody who inspires you right at the start. And I think that happened for me in primary school. So there was this primary teacher, John Stables, and he just fed us with these amazing stories. I mean, we were hearing about Lord of the Flies and all sorts of fantastical stories really early on. So I think that really got my attention, and he got us creative writing as well, which I think in Scotland's quite a big thing. You do examinations in creative writing, and it's really part of your education from right young, and I think that sort of is fed in too. And then sort of really fast forward, so I kept doing bits and pieces, but never thought, it's that thing that you think, oh, being a writer is like way out of reach sort of thing. But I did, then a writer in residence came into my life, and I think that happens quite a lot of people as well. Again, inspiration, where somebody locally's maybe got a job in a library or something. In this case, it was Tom Bryan, who's a Canadian Scots author, and he came in and kind of said, just a helping hand. And that got me started writing short stories again after a very long period of kind of not being involved in writing. And then finally, what the final thing was the Travers came to town with some Travers Theatre from Edinburgh. They came to our rural area and said, because, we're quite isolated in a rural area, and sort of wondering, how best to connect with writers and do it. And they came in, and they kind of really stirred my sense of heightened storytelling, dramatic storytelling, and I'm quite interested in the supernatural and fantastical things because I come from the Borders, which is quite I think I like to say it's where the Game of Thrones was inspired by. So it's kind of got that sensibility of lots of ruinous landscapes and things where you can project all sorts of stories onto from the history. So I think, and then I started sort of mixing short story writing, which I'd always done, with more of a sense of drama, and I started writing plays. Had a couple of BBC radio plays on, wrote some scripts for the stage, for fringe shows and that kind of thing. So I've kind of gone via short story writing into dramatic writing, including radio. So that's where I've kind of come full circle, and I'm kind of back to spoken word and ways to make writing kind of live in front of an audience. So yeah, so that's it in a nutshell.
The thing that I love most about what you just said is that we all have that person from our past who really is the inspiration. And I don't think I've ever thought about it like that. But you are absolutely right, because I'm now immediately thinking of, I had an English teacher. I'm just trying to, I must have been in high school. So I must have been... Yeah, no, it was high school. I was just trying to... All the schools merge into one. And I had a three-tiered system, unlike most people in the UK who only have, like, primary school and secondary school. Sorry for all of the non-UK people listening who will not understand our education system. But, so this was in high school. So it's year... Well, anyway, 13 until you leave for university. And English was always my best subject at school, but he really fostered this love of story and analysing story and learning how to write better. And, so yeah, that I just, blast from the past. So thanks for that. I'm happy with memories now.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have that person that kind of sparks that for you, because I remember going to a workshop once and it was Janice Galloway, the novelist, the Scottish novelist, and she said a librarian had kind of taken her into a corner and said, look, Janice, this is for you. And I kind of like, whoa, that somebody actually recognised that latent thing in her, that she was part of that world, and kind of really fostered that. And it's just so important, because I think in my case, like say English teachers, the primary teacher was great, but when we did things like Shakespeare at school, Shakespeare, Macbeth is amazing. It's like really this amazing supernatural horror story, but they kind of ruined it.
Yeah.
the way you do it at school, and you need someone with the kind of imaginative leap that kind of helps you see the excitement of it. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, and I will confess I obviously am a bit of a rebel, but so I never read any of the school textbooks that I was told to read, ever. I don't know how I managed to come out with like the A grades that I got, but obviously like in class you do the analysis and stuff, and that was enough, but they just ruined them. They ruined my joy of doing that kind of stuff in school. But what he did do was foster my love of reading anyway, aside from that, because obviously they would encourage you to read all kinds of books, but also the story. And I've just remembered, I still have the very first story that I wrote of any significance in school. Wow. Yeah. And I just remembered, I'm like going down memory lane. I'm so sorry, guys. This is completely irrelevant to our podcast, but I
think it's lovely. It ties you into what your reason, your why, talking about why and sort of tapping into that. I think it's really important, because sometimes you can get a bit dispirited when you're going along the writing journey, and just really tuning into that thing that got you going, that catalyst, I think is really important. So having that first story is just amazing.
Yeah, I know. I completely forgot until this point that I still had that story, but I'm almost certain I know where it is in the loft. Anyway, right, we are here to talk about audiobooks and writing for audio specifically. So you've written a book called Writing for Audiobooks, Audio First for Flow and Impact, which I say I read it, I listened to it. Does that count? Is that reading? It's a bit of a, is it reading?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's playing out, isn't it? Yeah.
But I listened to the audiobook in 2019 and I loved it. I have been trying to consume as much as humanly possible on this, audio creation front. But for those that haven't read it, could you tell everyone about the concept behind the book and...
Yeah, well, it's a massively exciting time for audiobooks, because it's really taking off. And I think that thing that you're saying about not sure whether it's reading or listening and where it sits, I think people are. It was really gobsmacking to me to hear from friends who were saying, "I've read this book," and they actually had listened to it, and I think that's really changing at the moment as it takes off. And so the book is really about exploring what's the difference between writing for the ear and writing for print and ebooks. And I have a sort of radio background, so I did radio news and I've done radio plays, and thinking dramatically and how you write scripts, realizing that there's actually quite a difference between how you write for the ear and how you write sort of more generally for the eye and for print. And so I wanted to just capture all those things that I'd learned, from doing radio and from being, you work with a producer or sort of script editor when you do your first radio script, and they kind of take away and go, you need to change this, and it's really developing your understanding of what's different. And I thought, God, this is gold stuff. That it was quite hard to learn that, because you had to go through that painful. Get heavily edited by a producer and go, I need to change everything. And so I wanted to capture all those things, because I think they're not out there enough. And for any authors who want to kind of make that transition and make their fiction books ready for audio narration, which obviously is a really costly process. You want to really make the best of it. So I just put all those things in the book. And yeah, it's to help authors think about what are the concepts that are different and get their book ready if they're planning to make that investment in an audio recording. Have they, just checklist of, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And and it's that's really the concept behind the book.
So obviously you've said that audio is increasing in popularity, but why would an author write for audio first?
Yeah, I think there's a sort of material reason which that it's really taken off, and they're saying audiobook sales. I mean, if one of the things about writing a book is it's your IP, and so you want to make the best of it on different platforms. So having done the work, I've written the book. This is another platform, and so I think just materially speaking, it's a good time to consider that. And also to just, I think the skills that you learn through writing for the ear are actually really kick-ass editing skills. So it can help clarify your writing and make it bolder, because you have to be bolder, you have to be clearer and crisper when it's just audio and not visual. So Yeah, so I think it just helps your editing skills generally. So there's the material reason, and then there's the clarity and understanding. And the other thing is obviously it's really fun. Forgetting that aspect, it is really fun to write for the ear and to have an audiobook performed and to hear it kind of coming across in that live way narrated. It's just a really fun medium.
So obviously, I think audio listeners will be able to, maybe subconsciously, maybe consciously, I don't know, but they will be able to tell the difference between something that's been written for sight versus something that's been written for the ear, because obviously, as per the title of your book, flow and impact. Do you think if somebody's writing for audio first, that sight readers would feel the difference? Do you think they would feel like it's been written for or audio, or do you think it is sight readers are much more forgiving?
I think it can. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, because I think some writers, for some writers who write fiction, for example, they're a kind of writer who is so tuned into audio types of writing, types of storytelling anyway, that you maybe wouldn't notice the difference. But you can certainly tell when someone hasn't thought about storytelling and its musicality, for example. I mean, there's people like, I would say, like, say Philip Pullman and Neil Gaiman, and they write in a way which is it's got a certain kind of musicality. And a lot of writers who are natural born storytellers, they're almost from that campfire storytelling tradition where you're really aware of audience and of the sort of musicality of performance. They do that naturally anyway. And I was really interested to hear, it was Philip Pullman on some documentary on the BBC or something, where he was talking about the kind of musical shape of his writing, that he kind of could anticipate what the shape of it that was coming up, even though he didn't know quite what was going into that sentence. You could sort of feel where it was heading. I thought, wow, that's he's got that kind of innate thing when he edits. So some people do that anyway. They have that kind of particular. But I think with other writers, you could tell, and you could say you could really improve your script for narration, your book for narration. And I think that's a key slip, because actually it is a script. I think that's the key thing. It becomes a script which is for performance, and you can tell if people haven't thought of that, because the writing can be more forgiving. As you were saying, it can be more forgiving in writing for sight, because it can have really long baggy sentences. It can have loads of which clauses and nested clauses and asides and back flips. And if the reader loses their way, they can always kind of nip back and have a quick, that's that character, I see where we are. Whereas audio, you don't have that kind of ease of just checking back and forward, flipping back, because it's a linear and unfolds in that sort of way. So you can sense that someone has written with that in mind, with that kind of performative aspect in mind.
Okay, so what are the key differences then between writing for sight and writing for the ear?
I think that sort of performance idea is one of the key ones. So most writers are aware of audience, but I think that people who write for the ear are aware of audience in a very particular way, because without the audience there and that awareness, it's not a performance. So you really, really have to imagine that person that you're speaking to and write for them and to them. So I think that's the key thing, that sort of that conceptual thing, like it's a performance to an audience. And the second thing is it's physical. It's actually physics. You're hearing a voice in your ear. It's kind of embodied in that very physical way. And all these things that are true for music are also true for writing for the ear. So it's things about rhythm, flow, repetition, and the kind of melody of a voice, and the kind of the way it has different intensities and that kind of thing, different kind of pattern making. So anything that's true of music is also true of writing for the ear. So I think that's a key difference. And also I just think voice is really important, and the whole sort of distinctiveness of who you are and how you relate and how you shape your worldview by it comes across so much more clearly when it's anchored to a voice. So I think for authors this is such a great thing, because not only are you being able to write for sight, but you can also get that whole that whole distinctiveness that comes through your manner of speaking and so on, your whole sort of personality and your colour that comes in, the choice of words, the kind of magic dust that makes each voice distinctive. I think I think that's one of the real joys of and one of the real differences is the fact that you can physically hear that human person coming across.
I think voice is a very, very interesting topic, and I'm just going to tangent off just a little bit on this because I find voice fascinating. So lots of I listen to both audiobooks and podcasts, and originally I didn't know you could listen on high speeds, so I consumed them for probably about a year at normal speed before I then realised you could increase them. And I was very, very, very particular about who I would and wouldn't listen to, because some people's voices are really annoying and you can't listen to them. And obviously that is going to be a huge consideration for anybody who's picking a narrator and choosing not to narrate themselves. But what I find interesting now is voice has less of an impact for me. And I don't mean the author's voice or the character's voices. I just mean the narrating voice. And this is why I say it's a tangent. But because I listen on high speed, so actually the voice usually sounds, if not like a chipmunk, then it is distorted at any rate. And I just wonder how important narrating voice is going to be for the future, when I know that our attention spans are shortening, and we're trying to consume more faster. So it's just a tangent really, but
I think it's a really interesting one, because this is developing so fast as well.
Yeah.
And there are kind of digital ways of and Kindle has got a voice speaking way to bring your book across. So, and also this thing about speed, which a lot of I've heard actors really railing about this fact that you can do it, but I know I do it too.
Yeah.
so listening faster, and I suppose it depends on the genre and what you're why you're listening, what you're listening for, and also you tune in, don't you? You get used to different speeds. It's amazing how you don't really hear a chipmunk style voice. You're actually just focusing really hard, and you hear it just as well.
Absolutely.
I find it amazing how quickly you get sort of into that, which is a bit frightening really. But I also think there's a thing about, in the spoken word realm, one of the things is the whole distinctiveness of character and voice, and you'd be listening for different reasons in that. So there, I would say, for example, if you're a Scots language speaker and you don't have many chances to get, people don't like reading so much in the Scots language because it's quite difficult. It's like the spelling's all different and all that kind of thing. But with spoken word, you can go directly to the voice as it's used in everyday life. And so I think for that kind of, which is a different genre than maybe information type books or non-fiction type books, that's a real opportunity as well. So there's two divergent things maybe. The people who want to read really fast and it's about information and really devouring a book really quickly, for example. And I'm not sure. And then maybe things like spoken word, it's a slightly different market and a different reason. So those things.
I agree, because interestingly, I can't listen to fiction audiobooks. So I only consume non-fiction in audio and podcasts, which are equally information-giving audio. And but it's funny, you were saying how you get used to it. I now think some of the podcasters that I listen to sound bizarre with their normal voice because I'm so used to hearing them at double speed. But you very much get used to it, and it didn't take me very long to be able to go from 1 speed to 2 speed to even a fraction faster sometimes.
Wow.
I just children you have to consume when you can, can't you? Okay, so how can writers create better flow for audio?
Well, I think the key thing is read it aloud, and it sounds really obvious, but I think quite often when people are preparing their book for audio, they'll read aloud in a way that's kind of to themselves, so they'll kind of mumble it to themselves, and that's not the same as reading aloud, which is projecting and really trying out how it feels and really sort of projecting it into the room. So I would say reading aloud reveals one thing that's quite fundamental, which is sentences are usually too long. So that's really one thing. It's just the human limitation of your breathing. It's like sentences are too long. So that I think that's the first thing that's a sort of trick. Just create better flow by breaking up your sentences more. Some words are a bit of an indicator, like things like which clauses, which are relative clauses. So it's kind of an aside explaining something. The man went down the street, which was at the far end of the and these are kind of like net shopping bags, where you can just sort of put loads of stuff in and then get back to the verb. So which clauses are a bit of a culprit, and quite often if you look out for words that are started by which clauses, sentences with which clauses, you can kind of chop them up a bit. That helps flow. And another thing is to look out for spans and arcs of attention. So you can use things like, there's these words in grammar called connectives, and that covers things like firstly and secondly. So firstly, big baggy net bag, where you can put loads of stuff in, and then secondly, big baggy net bag, and those can be expanded infinitely, but they also create spans of attention. So looking out for connectives, and that's even things like but, then, and so on, they really help you create a sense of flow. It's almost like the structural glue of paragraphs and so on. And I was thinking, things like touches, something I call touches, which is something. The weird thing about radio is that if something's not mentioned, it's literally invisible. So if you've got a radio drama scene and you've got, say, 3 characters in there and 2 are speaking away, and the third character is kind of on the edge of the room reading or something like that, because they're not mentioned, they're not speaking, they're not vocalizing in any way, they're literally invisible. So the actors have to kind of vocalize, and just to remind you of their presence. And that's a kind of touch that just, it's like a firefly that kind of refreshes the memory of that person or thing being there. And it's the same with audio writing and fiction. If, for example, you've got, I don't know, say you're in some kind of wardrobe or whatever, and there's a dog and you're hiding from somebody, and you've forgotten to mention regularly that the dog is there, then we literally can't see it in audio. So you have to keep popping up these touches that keep the picture alive, because the whole thing is about creating pictures in the reader's mind, and it's keeping the aspects of the picture alive that are important for the story. So I think touches is a thing that's really important, and maybe you need a bit more of that in audio writing than you do in fiction generally.
Yeah, and I think I can compare that to, so I do developmental editing, and one thing I often see writers do is they'll bring a character in, and sometimes they'll describe them, sometimes they won't, but if they have described them, that's it. You get one description and then nothing for the whole rest of the time. And actually, so I'm writing a book called The Anatomy of Prose, and one of the tips in there that I was talking about a couple of days ago was to do these touches, just little things, little reminders, even if it's body language or how, you don't have to continually describe everything, but just little touches to keep the image of that character, what they look like, what their how they interact with the world, alive in the reader's mind. So I love that is one of the things you need to do in audio as well. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't need to be like you say the dog and then you say the dog again. You can do it in an oblique way by referring to its, wet, smelly pelt, and these sometimes with characters they have totemic things that are attached to them. Like, Sherlock's pipe or something. So you kind of know it's a kind of totem for that character.
Exactly.
So there are ways to make the visual live. And in a way that's quite theatrical as well, because when you're thinking about what you're trying to think what can read well on stage, what can read really clearly on stage. And so Sherlock and his pipe, clearly, and so or Beckett's tree or something, these kind of things, or it's a bit like that in fiction, I think, and translating it into audio. If you can keep those totemic visual things alive, it really helps the reader to have their picture kept going with these little firefly moments.
Absolutely.
So
any other sentence level tips and tricks you can give listeners to improve their prose for the ear?
I've got a tip sheet on that, and I think the which that I mentioned is an important one. I think breaking things up, which and that clauses. There are 2 concepts which are really helpful, which kind of come from drama, and I think one is landing, and that's where the sentence lands. So if you're reading aloud, it's useful to think. Sometimes I see, like a wodge of prose which is very dense, and somewhere in the middle of that is a knife, which is the murder weapon, and it's kind of so buried within that text that's kind of really dense all around it that you don't notice the knife. So you know what I mean, it's like somebody sort of going up the stairs and there's a knife and you think, hang on a minute, was that just a knife? Was that because it's important? And if you don't land clearly on that word that needs to be salient for the story, it just kind of goes under. So I think the idea of where something lands is really important. So the beginnings and ends of sentences in audio writing are really, really important. A bit like, like in poetry, you have a line, and often what happens at the end of the line is got more prominence because of where it is. So kind of looking out for that. Sometimes it's just putting something like that at the end of a sentence, or at the beginning, or but in some way, or at the end of paragraph, but in some way using space a bit more to allow the salient things to really pop out. So that landing thing's a good one. And the other one is attunement, which I think it's like it's used in meditation. So or in meetings, sometimes in meetings people have this moment of attunement where you'll kind of settle and focus. Well, there's a kind of equivalent thing in audio writing, and in radio writing, which is the recognition that you don't really get straight into the sentence at the beginning. You need a little bit of time. So when you hear radio news, for example, you hear and in other news, they go on, and in other news is totally unimportant as a phrase, but it kind of gets your attention, and then the next bit is a panda has escaped from, it's that kind of thing. And if you think about it, once upon a time is a bit like of that attunement phrase. It's kind of once upon a time, and then there was a young girl in a red hooded coat going into the forest. That's a terrible way of saying that, wasn't it? But you know what I mean? It's like
later that afternoon or something.
Yeah, exactly. That little time of attunement and transition, which then puts the focus on the next bit. So there was then this happened, and it's just getting a sense of giving that little bit of time. So landing and attunement, I think, are two useful sentence level editing tips.
Amazing. And they in a way, they sort of contradict themselves, don't they? So it's obviously, it must be about getting a balance, because if the important thing is what's at the beginning and the end, but then also you need attunement time, that is definitely a balance that you need to strike. There's a psychological concept called primacy and recency effect, which I think is what's behind that, where you put the word knife, which is the important thing for foreshadowing. That's my geeky. I didn't. My degree's in psychology, so that's the only reason. Reason I know that. But fascinating!
That's
I'm
brilliant.
Like geeking out over here.
That's a brilliant one, and there'll be another one which you'll love as well, which is the Zeigarnik effect.
Okay.
And the idea of something starts and it's got closure, and that you're kind of like in hooks and whatnot, you plant a hook and then people are waiting to see where that leads. And in script writing they have a thing called plant and payoff. So at story level there's the plant something, like it's like the it's the Chekhov gun on the wall or something. It's got to go off. It's a plant and payoff. And I've heard of this and I thought it was really fascinating. That's the Zeigarnik effect is like the human need for closure. So if something is started off, it needs to kind of have its answer at some point, and you can use that idea to create these sort of spans. And when you do, firstly, secondly, whatever, that's actually the Zeigarnik effect. I think that's harnessing the Zeigarnik effect, because it's kind of going, we've got to wait for this next thing. And when I did radio interviews sometimes with politicians, sort of local radio, and they'd been quite well trained in this kind of thing, where they would go, okay, there are 3 answers to your question. Firstly, and then you'd go, oh no, I've got to, because they'd created a span.
Yeah, and you couldn't interrupt.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting from a sort of positive perspective of how do you sustain attention, and so I think that primacy and recency effect, and I think that all ties in somehow.
Absolutely.
I think it's really interesting.
And is it Zeigarnik, you said?
Yeah.
That effect also, I think, is you see that in books that are really pacey. So they'll leave something unanswered at the end of a chapter so that the brain has no choice but to continue reading. I love love when a book does that. I hate it, but I love it. Yeah. You bastards! I'll just have to keep reading until 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Okay, what mistakes do you see writers making when trying to write for audio?
I suppose the first thing is sort of being aware that it may be different and kind of approaching it differently. So I guess the first thing is really preparing your script, because audio is so expensive to produce that going into a situation where you're getting your audiobook recorded and not having done that prep, I think that's a mistake, because it's just a really costly thing. And knowing that sound editing is really quite involved and isn't the same as like tweaking out a word, which you would do if you had a written text. So I think the thing is to really edit your script, practice it, and tighten it up for audio, and use markup just to underline where you would emphasize things. I think that's the mistake, not actually acknowledging that it's different and going into that situation without having done some prep. I think that's the main thing. Yeah. Oh, and also narrating, the actual physical narration of your own book. I'd say people have maybe an idea of how to perform or project, which is a bit different. I mean, like being, I think you've got to think of it not as an audience that's a huge, loads of people out there, but more a specific friend. And actually, that's the really nice thing about radio writing, because it's, if you're an introvert particularly, it's got that intimacy. So what I do is I post a picture of, in my case it's Robert Louis Stevenson. he's on my wall, but it's somebody who I really love and want to speak to about what excites me in the book, and I use that as a kind of projection. So I think that's a really good thing, not to think of it as a kind of declamatory way of reading, but actually more an intimate one-to-one, and you can really help that by pinning somebody on your wall.
I think that's a great tip. I'd never have thought of that.
It really helps. It's funny. It's like you're speaking to them, and it makes you point it out a little bit more.
Yeah.
And you've got then some joy in who you're speaking to as well, which is nice.
Or fear if you put your old boss up there or something.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, but I'm evil, so that's the first thing I thought. Okay, so you actually narrated your audiobook as well, didn't you?
Yes, gosh, that was a learning curve. Blimey.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should ask what mistakes you made. No, what tips would you give for authors wanting to narrate their audiobooks?
Yeah, well, I made loads of mistakes. So the first tip is don't underestimate what it involves, because I thought, oh yeah, how hard can it be? Okay, you're just speaking and reading aloud, and actually, yeah, it was quite it's quite involved. It needs a hell of a lot of stamina. So the tips would be to really practice and prepare your script, and to mark it up. I think as the first step. And there's some sort of things that I've discovered. Yeah, God. Really be hydrated. What I realized was that your body doesn't it takes a while to sort of process liquids and that kind of thing. So what voice artists do, apparently, because I was reading up on all this once I discovered how tricky it was drink loads the evening before, so that you're really your voice is not going to get so hoarse, and you can't just sort of swig on the day and expect it all to be really, really good. It's better to kind of be, have sustained hydration. So that was a useful thing. And also discovered coconut oil on your lips is really good, because some things like that. People swear by a slice of apple, or I don't know. Coconut oil was the thing for me that was really good. So yeah.
That is fascinating. I always keep lip balm in here, and I always put lip balm on before I come on the podcast. That's usually the last thing I do. But I don't do it consciously. I just, obviously it must be my subconscious brain going, your lips are chappy today, love,
Yeah. But I think what's different about coconut oil is what I realised you can actually kind of you can use it as a kind of mouthwash. So it sounds quite gross, doesn't it? But it's like, it sort of works. Whereas lip balm, you would have to kind of crunch it up. But the general idea is the same. Yeah.
Coconut oil has a plethora of different uses, though. I know you can use it as like a hair mask and all sorts. Anyway,
it's got a lot of calories as well. That's the drawback. Definitely.
Yeah. So I write both non-fiction and fiction, but specifically for my non-fiction, I have a lot of graphs or tables or images. So obviously those aren't going to translate it into audio. What would you do in a situation like that for authors who have extra things in their books?
Yeah, because numbers and URLs and that kind of thing don't come across that well in air. So people have different techniques for that. But if you've got loads of things like that and things that might go out of date, for example, what's great about Audible is that you can put them in a PDF and that's attached to your book. So it's kind of like a downloadable that's just related to your book, and people can get that. So you can use that to capture anything like graphs or hyperlinks or stats or anything that's maybe not completely evergreen and needs to be updated every now and then. So yeah, that's what I would do with any of those things. And you can also, radio tends to say, don't use long numbers, but round them up and down. And, similar with stats, use comparisons rather than loads of long strings of numbers, because the mind can't take in too many numbers. You know what it's like when you've got phone numbers and you're trying to remember them. It's a bit similar with audio. So anything that you can capture outside that, and then that lessens the load on you having to put that into the audiobook itself. So that PDF's a key thing, yeah.
I definitely don't do numbers. The other day I recorded a quarterly goals post, and I had 19 goals or something. I could not even count. I couldn't keep the numbers in my head whilst I was talking. But anyway, I was mortified. This is the Rebel Author Podcast. So tell us about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Oh, heck. Right. Well, I think the funny thing is, rebel in the author world, being an indie author is a rebel thing anyway, because you're kind of going against the traditional publishing and kind of trying to carve your own path, which I think it's intrinsic to the whole thing that that you're about and that many of us are about, which is really doing our own thing. But there's a sort of specific example here, because I actually play. I know you play cello as well, so I play cello, but I play it really badly, and I discovered it has another use in spoken word. So I actually play under the name Rebel Cello, which involves playing my cello sideways with a strap on so that it's kind of like a guitar.
I love it.
And I use that in a spoken word context. So it's great because you can play sort of little bass riffs and little, you can use the bow, but it's all kind of sideways. And yeah, I've had so much more fun ever since I've kind of picked it up that way than when I was trying to do it in a kind of classical way in an orchestra, because I never really had the technique to get beyond fourth position or whatever. I wasn't really that great for classical music, but in the sort of folk and spoken word world, you can just kind of do your own thing. So yeah, I've really enjoyed doing that. So yeah, standing on stage with a cello sideways, doing some of my poetry. And actually spoken word is great for people who want to practice reading their word out aloud. So yeah, really worth trying, because it's short and there's no huge commitment and you can just try it out.
When you told me you were called Rebel Cello, I was like, all of the high fives.
Yeah.
I
should try it.
Yeah, well, no, so that's what I was going to say. So I played for, I think, 7 or 8 years when I was at school, and I loved playing. And actually, on my bucket list is to get another cello, but to buy one, because when I was at school, you just have, you rent them kind of thing from the school. Okay. And so yes, on my bucket list, I would love to get a cello again and to play. But when I was at school, if you wanted to play, so I played, I think, for 6 years. And then for the last year, they changed the policy that if you wanted to play an instrument and have lessons through the school, you had to play in the orchestra. Now, I don't really do people, even less so in a bloody orchestra where you have to keep time with everybody and everybody's like, well, anyway, my orchestra were really militant about being orchestral, and I was not orchestral. I played for me and for me only. It was just, I had a love of music and the strings and a love of practicing and just being by myself with that music. And anyway, so I went once, and I was humiliated. I remember the orchestra music teacher humiliating me in front of everybody. And so at the end of the class, I said to him, I am not coming to the orchestra. And he was like, well, either you play in the orchestra or you don't play at all. So I handed him the cello and was like, well, fuck your cello then. Yeah, literally.
No, that's really sad.
Yeah, I know. And I walked out, and that was the last time that I played. And how dare he ruin a child's love of music like that just to play in the orchestra? In fact, I'm now furious. At the time, I was just like, well, screw him, blah, 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 demonstrative little teenager that I was. But now I'm like, how dare he? Like, I could have, ended up
that
playing.
could have been, that could have been such a sort of rich part of what you did all the rest of it was such a rich creative outlet. And what's brilliant, because I think you should get back into it. I think the thing is, what's now, there's such a sort of alternative cello movement, so a lot of people are using it in different ways. There's this amazing guy who kind of leaps about and does mosh pit type things with a cello.
Oh my god!
There's just some really wild stuff happening with cellos, and particularly with the liberation of being able to play them standing up and wandering around. It's just fabulous for storytelling, and you get to be all electronic as well, which is, for me, that was just great. You remember Electric Light Orchestra, and they used to think, wow, I want to be something like that, but because they had electric cellos, and now you can do that. You can have a sound effect, you can have a looper, and the great thing about loopers is you don't need to be like a sociable person, because you can play all the I really love the fact that I can layer music. You'd love it. You'd absolutely love it.
Now the key question is, obviously, for branding, do they do them in purple?
Do they? Probably do. I bet they do.
Yeah.
You can get all sorts of electric cellos, and some of them are really quite sculptural. They don't look like normal cellos. They've got
like hollow,
strange shapes and things like that. So it's amazing how much has changed recently. There's a guy called Mike Block online who sort of does, I suppose it's like the alternative cello scene, and so he's just he was really inspiring. So I think you'll enjoy that. And oh god, it's such a shame not to have that kind of avenue closed off for you at that time.
I know.
So definitely check it out.
We
can duet sometime as well.
I don't know. I think I need quite a lot of practice before I got back to that level. Tell listeners where they can find out more about you, your books, and your audiobooks.
Oh, well, I have my own site, which for my creative work, which is juleshorne.com, and my name is Jules, like Jules Verne, Horne with an E, juleshorne.com, and where my non-fiction books is method writing site, so it's method-writing.com, and there's various kind of downloadables and things on there, including a writing for the ear tip sheet if anyone's interested in that. So thanks.
And thank you for your time today. Also, thank you to all of the show's patrons who support the show and help to keep it running. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, you can do so by visiting www.patreon.com/Sasha Black. Thank you very much to listeners.
Thanks very much, Sasha. Sorry, I spoke over there. Thanks very much, Sasha. That's been great.
Thank you. I'm Sasha Black. You were listening to Jules Horne, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast. Next week, I have a special episode because I have not one guest, but two. Absolutely amazing husband and wife team who are the owners and founders of Design for Writers. Design for Writers are a cover design company and a website design company, and they are my very own cover designers. So it is an absolute honour because I have been trying to drag them onto this podcast pretty much since the start, and they are hilarious as well, and there's a little bit of banter, and that's just them. So yes, I am super excited. We'll be talking all about how to get the best cover, pitfalls, things to look out for, and lots and lots of tips. So I will look forward to seeing you all next week. Don't forget, you can still pre-order the ebook of The Anatomy of Prose on Amazon, and by the end of this coming week, hopefully by the time you listen to this, you should be able to order the paperback as well. Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher, and when you have a moment, please leave a review.